Everhood is, in many ways, a surreal type of game set an ungodly amount of time in the future in some other dimension separate from the human world. Your character is a wooden doll who goes by the alias of Red, who's basically Geno but with a red cloak and yellow dreads. Oh yeah, you're also missing an arm because the blue guy took it while you were asleep. The game will tell you this off the bat as it expects you to just jump right into the action with a quick battle tutorial. From there, you're running into battle after battle in a wide array of locations that include a spooky castle, carnival racetrack, a town where time has no meaning, and many other places. Upon first glance, the game can look very similar to a classic rhythm game, but it is no way related. When you place yourself in front of a note, you're not pressing a color-coded button to progress through a song, no. Instead, you'd lose half your health, wonder what the heck is going on, and before you know it, you're dead only 10 seconds into the tutorial battle. And I was stuck there for a while on the hard difficulty, where the devs claim is the way the game is intended to be played. For a point that will be discussed later on, I don't believe staying on hard will hinder your enjoyment of this game, while it still throws out novel ideas at you in every other battle. Completing the tutorial leads you on a short path to an ATM machine much like the first battle, only to then get into it with some sunglasses wearing blue elf, where you start getting introduced to new types of mechanics in battle. In this case, you come across these notes with what looks like pillars of light coming out of them. These signify that you can't jump over them, and now you're juggling between maneuvering around strings of notes and jumping over others for when you want to stay in a lane. The game provides this as an in-game tip on the game over screen, but you'll sooner find yourself doing jump rolls that let you switch lanes and jump at the same time. After busting some moves out on the floor, you gain access to a VIP area where you confront Golden Pig, who is purple. Fucking Barney looking ass. He sends you to the incinerator, where it's a life or death situation because you're a wooden puppet, and fire mixed with wood usually doesn't end well for the wood. So in my case, I died. And then the game started to show its true colors, and that is to screw with you in every way it can visually during battles. It becomes almost like a surreal dream battle sequence, where characters on the screen begin to shift into one another, rain begins pouring down, and a heavenly figure with one arm floats around while a guy tries to destroy your life by playing on the piano. And then you're fighting gnomes, which I think are supposed to represent the developers of the game. I mean, the title of the track even pokes fun at the idea of us wanting gnomes, but before you can even comprehend what's happening at this point, you come across the door and you're back in the broken down incinerator room. So you climb up the ladder while making your way out of the incinerator room, pick up Blue Thief who just lost his legs to Gold Pig, and you make your way out the gray door. And this is the game's hub area. Now, I've heard some people say this part of the game is a lot like Yume Nikki, but I wouldn't have a fucking clue what they're talking about. The game can progress in a multiple of ways depending on the path you take from here. The carnival area has a cool mini game where it takes place on a fast-paced old school racetrack. It's probably even more simple than the base game's battle system, but the devs really nailed down the urgency of racing down a winding racetrack at 120km/h speeds. This is the only time in the game you're doing this type of race, but it was one of the more memorable sequences I came across during my time. You can play essentially what is virtual tennis with this game's battle system, where instead of jumping over obstacles, you're trying to hit back balls that the NPC throws at you between the 5 lanes. You even get into an epic D&D campaign, where your character gains the ability to deflect projectiles back to another character with a sword. Speaking of which, the cast of characters in this game, pretty staggering considering the scope of this type of indie game. There's a recurring cast of at the very least 7 different characters that you'll consistently come across in multiple locations and the many different doors you'll walk in. For the most part, I'd say the characterization between each of them is very light, but it's enough to make them stand out from one another. You have Rasta Beast, who's the dependable type who could just as easily be the main character of the game if you weren't around. Ziggs is kind of like the bitter rival, sort of like a Vegeta who always gets his ass whooped because he always seems to get the short end of the stick. Green Mage is basically just a hype man and instigator. He's into anything happening as long as it's thrilling and brings him a sense of purpose. You won't really see a lot of character development, though it goes without saying that they very much have personalities set in stone prior to the events of this game. Now, what I would consider the first arc of this game is the journey across the multiple doors and dimensions you gain access to through the hub area. Along the way, you will come across pieces of a broken blue door, where once you've collected them all, will assemble at the empty door frame in the hub. From there, you will gain access to a new desert area that from here, after some deliberation and reflecting on my time with the game, is where the novelty begins wearing out. For my first time going through here, I did not feel the fatigue that this game soon presents near the end of this first arc. So going across this singular, long, and desolate road was actually really exciting. Well, less exciting and more foreboding as the soundtrack really picked up with its ambience and stellar way of switching the mood up depending on the scene. It gets dark out, so you find a campfire where Rasta Beast is sheltered in and staying with them until the morning. After coming across a broken down car and more sandy plains, you reach these really large double doors. Entering them puts you in a winding corridor battling some guys and capping it off with the purple mage. Once they've all given up on stopping you from progressing, you finally get to confront Golden Pig, who, again, not golden at all. In fact, he's called Gold Pig. Why did I write Golden Pig? Anyway, you lay him out, and then he's convinced by everyone around to let you gain your arm back. From there, the game takes a real quick 180, though the subtle hints and clues were scattered across your journey. Alright, so we got our arm back, and now we're hearing voices and we're seeing visions invading our mind, telling us that all the people we've come across are actually trapped within this dimension. It's up to you to free them. It wasn't that your right arm alone had the ability to free their souls though, but rather you needed the power of holding projectiles in both hands, so that then you may be able to help them. So basically, this second arc of the game has you going around the areas you've been to already, seeking out any and all NPCs you can find and killing them. Well, the game calls it kill right here, even though it was phrased as freeing them initially, like freeing their spirits, their souls. You'll come across a lot of the older NPCs and fights you have gone through without much change in them, so memory can serve you well with how you handle the battles. The only difference this time is this new mechanic they introduced where basically you can deflect the projectiles back at them. So this is gonna harken back to the deflecting projectiles within the D&D campaign, where in there you were able to deflect red projectiles. But however, with your right arm, you get the ability to absorb 2 projectiles of the same color, and you can deflect it back at the enemy to do damage. Now technically you could always absorb whichever colored projectiles you want, but the main purpose of this is to absorb 2 so that you gain the ability to deflect them right back at them. So this is essentially the beginning of the end of my own personal experience with this game. The idea of going back around to kill or save the many NPCs I had come across throughout my entire journey sounded like a cool premise. It was an interesting take on when the main character finally finds true purpose in a video game. It's probably a little obscure of a reference, but the real kind of had shades of Casher's Sins during the last few episodes of that show. Though, I'd say in Red's case, there's no real shame or emotions attached to the discovery of his true identity and purpose in this world. It's kind of up to the player to decide, as I've seen many other people's playthroughs, and no, you don't need to actually kill everybody. But, being as it were, I decided, you know what, the prospect of going around doing this sounds kind of cool and like a fun challenge. However, there was just one problem with the whole arc. It was that it would drive me almost to the end of my wits after having gone through so much prior to just getting my arm back. So a lot of people online tend to complain about the arbitrary nature of the battles and when the notes projectiles come out to the beat of the song. I'll agree that a lot of the times the attacks didn't match with what was going on in the song, and neither did the attacks ever follow a particular instrument used during a song. Meaning, there was no color coding between, green notes being guitar or blue notes being bass. There was a little bit of that, hints of that in certain battles, but a lot of the times you'll get thrown into a whole wide array of different colors and notes just all across the 5 lanes. For me personally, it wasn't an issue that the notes and attacking felt random when put over the soundtrack, because all it was in the end was the backdrop to you dodging all the notes until you can get to the end of the song. However, I don't feel that the developers really took into account the balancing act they would have to do when it came to this second arc of the game. With notes being arbitrarily colored most of the time, and a lot of times you have multiple colors coming at you at once, it's almost impossible to keep up with which color you have currently absorbed, and when the next time you'll see that color is to absorb and hit your opponent with. A lot of the times I found myself absorbing multiple notes across one or many lanes just to find that I kept switching the color I currently had absorbed. What makes it worse is that a lot of the tracks at this point don't loop, so once you've reached the end of a song, if you haven't killed the enemy during that time frame, you have to start over from the start of the song and try to do enough damage during that time to kill them. Things only got worse as I was in the middle of my recording of my gameplay footage when the gameplay suddenly became choppy and stuttery in frames. Rasta's battle at this point was practically impossible as the game would slow down and speed up at random points during his slew of attacks and color combinations. I had to stop and reopen the game, and thankfully it was enough to fix the problem for a future gameplay recording. This whole experience though, it really soured my feelings, and to avoid that from happening again, I decided it was time to bump the difficulty down so I can make sure that I can get through this battle to see what else the game had to offer. Battle after battle, all of the complaints from everyone else and my own frustrations with the note placements and the arbitrary color patterns all culminated together when I reached the basement of Green Mage's house. When Green Mage invites you to his room for a real fight, there's a corridor off to the right side you can take a detour into. You are warned countless times that the corridor is practically endless, and even reaching the end would be fruitless. But I decided, hey, I'm not having really that much fun trying to absorb these projectiles, keeping track of this stuff, throwing it back at them just to free you guys. So I took my chances, and I held the right arrow key for the longest time with my phone pressed down on it. Signs would come up every couple of minutes of me doing that while I was looking at other things on my PC, telling me things like, turn back now, you haven't reached the halfway point, this and that, rada rada. Before I could give myself the chance to start thinking about giving up though, the scenery changed. You see, rubble and debris started appearing into the hallways as I found myself walking up and down these obstacles to make it to the next room. So I took my chances as I was having more fun seeing if this would lead anywhere, or if I was just gonna end up wasting my time because this is actually an endless hallway. Well, I wish I could tell you things worked out from my own volition and determination, but truthfully all I did was I just looked up if there was an actual end to the hallway, and when I did find out there was one, and a person that I had just randomly found online took almost 3 hours to get there. When I had over an hour already under my belt walking through the hallway, I knew I had to see it to the end. So I was running and dodging and walking and hoping to see the 3 most important screens during this sequence. 2 empty hallways back to back, and then the next would start with rubble in the middle lane. When I would find this fated combination, I'd hold my breath to wait to see the next screen countless times until the fated empty hallway with the serene soundtrack. That's when I knew my journey with this game was over. I walked over to my resting place, credits rolled, and I said, yep, this is my ending. So, the music has an interesting headspace it lives in when it comes to things that I'm into and all that. A lot of times it's very upbeat, techno-inspired, EDM, house, and it's also got a lot of adrenaline behind a lot of the performances on it. You'll get an assortment of keyboard and piano, percussion, electric guitars, distortion, and there's even a couple of orchestral pieces randomly spruced in there. Comparatively, there is a lot more 8-bit music in a game like Undertale, and I have to say, even the ambient music pairs very nicely with the visuals and setting it pairs up with in-game. Music doesn't necessarily blend into one another in terms of the songs and their sounds, but instrumentation and effects used are very similar across a lot of tracks. However, a lot of songs tend to have their own themes and motifs that make it very easy to listen to them separately from one another. Though I think it's hard to set the mood right with the game, like this, where everything is kind of random and doesn't make sense a lot of the time. It is very bombastic and random, so in that sense, it actually does mix it pretty well. So your main gameplay is like your typical RPG maker or game similar to that of world exploration. You move right around with your arrow keys or WASD, double tap any direction to sprint, and interact with objects with the spacebar or whatever else you deem fit. I opens up your inventory where you can also access the main menu and settings. When you aren't doing any gameplay sequences in the general world, you're basically in battles all the time that take place over the course of a song the enemy plays. Literally, they're playing it. Look, you see this guy? He's tapping his toes. He's playing the song. You have 5 separate lanes that you move between with the left and right movements, and you push up to jump in place. Combining up with either left or right lets you jump roll in the respective direction. Use both options of moving left and right, as well as jumping or jump rolling gratuitously for avoiding notes. Later in the game, more specifically the second arc of the game, you gain access to the down arrow key, which, if you time it right before a note hits you, lets you absorb a colored note. Beware that if you're trying to absorb a note that doesn't have a solid color in the middle of it, like if it's transparent or black or whatever, then you can't absorb the note. Absorb 2 notes of the same color, and then you can push down again to deflect the projectiles back. This projectile can damage your enemy, but it can also destroy projectiles that are incoming on the lane you're in. A main objective in the second arc is to defeat enemies, so if you're looking to deflect projectiles from one lane, you gotta be careful. If there are too many projectiles in the way, yours may never reach the enemy, and you could potentially get hit with a stray one you weren't able to destroy. Side gameplay, as in side content, comes in the form of different takes on the normal battle formula. There's a race you can participate in where you hold up to accelerate and you move left and right to avoid obstacles and drift on tight turns during the race. You can ride on a minecart where you have to alternate between opposite ends of the battle lanes to move the cart forward. Many variations of this type exist, but there are also moments where you have to maneuver through hazards in the normal world traversal. There's a boss fight where you have to avoid small projectiles with your movement keys, and there are obstacle courses to make your way across. While the variety in building blocks on the core concept of gameplay is spread across very nicely within the first arc of the game, the introduction of deflection in the second arc and the tight restrictions on pulling it off properly can be a bit of a downer personally. You also tend to get a very strong feeling of inconsistency with how developers place the projectiles on an enemy track, especially if you put it side by side with the music accompaniment. There's this sort of like difference between the notes showing on screen and which instruments to follow in the music. For me personally, it almost soured the experience I had through the first arc. In the end though, the developers were at least savvy about this, with providing players multiple ways to experience the second half of the game, which in turn leads to multiple endings. Something you probably didn't expect me to bring up in an indie game like this is the idea of a battle editor. If you look through the main menu, you can see an option for it. It's called Custom Battles. Essentially, the developer has decided its players should be the ones to create their own battles the way they see fit. It's kind of like a light version of mod support, but mod support nonetheless. I haven't dabbled with it since completing my playthrough, but it's a cool initiative the developers decided to partake in when releasing this game. You can check back with me here to let me know how your experience was with the editor and trying out other people's battles, if that's a feature, that's a functionality of it. So, I know this game is special to the devs. They even asked people in the credits to email them, tell them how the game made them feel. They're not looking for bug reports or a place to vent from the players that bought their game. They're not looking for any of that sort of things. All they want is for the game to have left a lasting impression on the player. And even through some of my own frustrations and sincerity with how I feel about this game, I don't think an email would suffice with how this game made me feel. So, as to not make this feel like a footnote in what is definitely a longer video from my last one, and maybe my first, this is going to be kind of like an open letter from me to the developers. Thank you for this game. I know release dates and plans are not necessarily as clear-cut and intentional for visibility to as many people as possible as some of us think, but your game could not have come at a better time for me personally. I beat Doom Eternal back in December last year, worked and slacked on that video for a while before making conscious decisions on shortening the length of it. But what your game has done is inspired creativity and ideas for this new one. I had nothing to look forward to, and your game randomly came up on my front page for your release day on Steam. My brother, he loves Undertale, and I love joking about how I've never played it to him or anyone we know, so I thought, guess I found my Undertale with this one. I know now your game is clearly not Undertale, as some would make you believe and also complain about for some reason, but it's definitely much more than that. You guys clearly have your own ideas for game design, creativity, and world building that I think you should keep focusing on. So many of the battle sequences and how they went one after the other gave me these same Doom Eternal vibes of non-stop action, but with the fidelity that we see in indie games like Hylix 2. This game made me feel like a kid again, especially during the second half where I just flat out said, I'm running to the end of this hallway because this is going to be my ending for this game. All in all, I really liked your game, guys. Seriously. This has been a very unique experience, and it's something that maybe down the line I can revisit again and not have to worry too much about how I feel about certain things here and there. But seriously, thank you for putting your time and effort into making this very awesome game. And yeah, that's it for me, I guess. I'll be back again soon for a quickie. That sounded wrong. Play the music.